today I'll be speaking with you all about a project called Sacred Geographic Superimposition. This is a story map project that includes an augmented reality mobile application for iOS, and it features public art and sculptures from the various collections that I work with through my institution. So to begin, this project was actually developed out of separate projects to explore story mapping as a method to build digital exhibits, learn the photogrammetric workflow to generate 3D models of outdoor sculptures, and use linked open data and 3D modeling to bring greater digital visibility to the collection of African sculptures in the European Paintings Department at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Over time, these projects merged together and expanded into Sacred Geographic Superimposition as a way to develop a methodology that takes advantage of these easily accessible tools and not so easy to develop skill sets strictly for the purposes of curating Black material culture in a digital format. So it started with, I was invited to these weekly extern meetings that we have at Temple University Libraries and the Legacy Duckworth Scholar Studio. We've got some graduate students who work with us, different batch every year. And I was, experiencing their projects as they were building them. And there was one particular student who was an archaeology PhD student, and she was interested in sharing how to do photogrammetry. So she and I actually went down to the Philadelphia City Hall, and in front of it is the statue that you see on your screen, Octavius B. Cato. And she taught me how to do photogrammetry as a part of kind of testing the way that she would teach this when she did her workshop for the Temple family. So it kind of started with that little nugget, and then within my postdoctoral fellowship through the Council on Library and Information Resources, we were able to kind of select these inquiry groups that we wanted to be a part of. And one of the options was building digital exhibits through ArcGIS, specifically with the story maps feature. So, okay, these things kind of came together. And then at the same time, the last kind of piece of this was that I was participating in a weekly Unity working group where we were kind of learning how to use the software. And we were more focused on 3D modeling and VR, but it also does AR. And so that's kind of the route that I decided I was going to go. So after kind of thinking about all of these things and how they might fit together, the primary impetus was to bring together the development of these specific digital humanities skills, photogrammetry, data visualization through mapping, and interactivity through augmented reality to establish a workflow that can be utilized by small institutions with limited capacity and resources. Similarly, the motivation for this project revolves around sharing this methodology that uses a combination of free, open source, and low-cost proprietary tools with a community of Black studies scholars so that it can be employed in other projects being built by independent researchers. A number of issues along the way. I was learning these skills as I was working on this project. And that kind of it led to a friend of mine and myself to repeat to each other, technology is gonna technology. I would share my frustrations in learning a skill or the software not functioning as expected, or just being generally overwhelmed with the slow pace of the project against a loudly ticking self-imposed, keyword self-imposed, no one else imposed this, but self-imposed deadline nonetheless. And we would repeat to each other, technology is gonna technology. While it never immediately eased my irritation, it did give me a sort of mantra that I could remind myself, this is supposed to be difficult and to keep on pushing. I always had my target audience in mind as I was developing this. Like I said before, I used free, open source, and low-cost tools. Prior to being employed by the Philadelphia Museum of Art and Temple University Libraries, I was working at a small museum in Maryland called the Prince George's African American Museum and Cultural Center, where at one point we had 4 staff, one was on vacation, no executive director, 2 of us were part-time, 1 full-time, and we were running the entire institution like that for a month. Other times, the staff kind of ebbed and flowed, but generally speaking, we didn't really have the resources to find a contractor to do this work on our behalf. So I was developing this with the idea in mind that these workflows could be shared with other institutions. I'm kind of doing the hard part of figuring it all out so I could share it on the back end with other folks who are interested in this work, and they can do it themselves without having to write a huge grant with no grant writer on staff or something like that. So I've got this quote on the screen by Trisha Rose. This is a quote from an interview that she did with Mark Derry. Mark Derry is actually the person who coined the term Afrofuturism, which I'll talk about later on. And Trisha Rose stated, if you're going to imagine yourself in the future, you have to imagine where you've come from. Through my approach, Blackness is not treated as just data, history, or discourse, but rather a living, changing thing based on our humanity throughout time that incorporates what Andre Brock calls the materiality, temporality, and meaning-making capacities of the Black digital and its practitioners as technological mediation of the Black post-present. As such, this project has expanded into a virtual collage of local public artwork, museum and library collections objects, and spiritual and metaphysical objects in order to transform, sorry, this menu bar just came down, to transform each included outdoor sculpture and mural into altars adorned with the latter element. I specifically chose altars as the superimposed content based on my own experience exploring the limitations and capabilities of various augmented reality tools at a time when I was waking up in the middle of the night trying to fit these metaphorical puzzle pieces together. I would sit in my living room near a coffee table that I had just kind of gradually transformed into an altar of my own, draped in a backless pillow sham from scraps of African fabric that my deceased mother quilted, adorned with photos of family and friends, plants, a study Bible, crystals, candles, an abalone shell with white sage and palo santo, a sculpture that my mother's oldest sister sent to me, and other sentimental objects. On some sleepless night in the spring semester of 2022, when I glanced over at the table in the corner, I suddenly found the inspiration for how to bring this project together in a manner that blended my practical goals of developing a project that combines photogrammetry mapping and augmented reality with my artistic and curatorial imagination. And so at the same time, I was doing a lot of research on Black digital humanities and Afrofuturism. I knew a little about Afrofuturism already, and I saw it as kind of a conceptual framework for this work. Afrofuturism is a reimagining of time. It can be past, present, future, whatever it is, through fantasy or technology to speculate on the future. And as I'm doing a project that's based in Black digital humanities, I thought, okay, I would love to bring in that fantasy element as I already have the technology as a part of this project. I was also working on developing a symposium with Temple University Libraries. It was entitled Present Encounters, Digital Humanities Meet Afrofuturism, and we were able to invite some scholars from other institutions to speak about projects they were working on. We did some demos of work that was happening within the institution, including this one, but also some others that my colleagues are working on, and one of the externs who was also working in the space of Black digital humanities. And it was just a really great time, and I'm happy to be working on these projects. So, Philadelphia is known as Mural City. There are 3,600 murals that like paint the entire city. It's like one of the most amazing things to experience. It's one of the first things I noticed when I moved in August 2020 during the pandemic. There are also an estimated 1,500 outdoor sculptures. Those artworks can often be in flux. Some are installed as intentionally temporary. Others have been removed for a variety of reasons. And through photogrammetry, I've created 3D models of 8 outdoor sculptures, which you can see on the list. That's the Smithsonian American Art Museum's Art Inventories catalog is the first source that I looked at, and there were quite a few. Some of them were either not on display anymore in stores. There were like 5 or so that were busts, and they're owned by some organization, and they're not available on public display, so I didn't include those. I also happened to be working at the same time as the Monumental Tour, which was going around the country with 4 or 5 different public artworks by Black sculptors. When they got to Philadelphia, there were 4, but there was a 5th one that was included in some of the locations that they went to. And those were gone by January of 2022. So I had to kind of work really fast to get those included into this project. I also I incorporated a number of outdoor sculptures, murals. I lost my place in my notes, I'm sorry. But murals, you can see there's 16 murals on there. I contacted Mural Arts Philadelphia, which is a local organization that puts up murals all over the city. And they had a resource called African American Iconic Images. And then I did some research on the artists to identify which ones were painted by Black artists or included a Black artist on the team, because there were a couple that had more than one artist listed. And so the 16 that I was able to find physically in the city were included in this project. I also made 3D models of 8 African sculptures from the museum collection and 16 African instruments from the Charles L. Blockson Afro-American collection at Temple University Library. These models have been organized into a story map, which I'll show later, with the accompanying augmented reality iOS mobile application. In an effort to limit the scope of this project to become both manageable and politically aligned with my work, I elected to apply the Forest Bias model and focus exclusively on a representative sample of outdoor sculptures and murals by Black artists, which I mentioned earlier. All right, let this load. Okay, so in order to generate the models of each of the sculptures, the smaller sculptures, like the African instruments and the sculptures that are in the European paintings department, I use traditional photogrammetry. You can see this workflow on the screen. This is available at TikTok /@beingfrank. That's my TikTok handle. I use a Canon EOS 60D camera on a 6-foot camera stand. I captured photos of the sculpture from as many angles as possible, and then followed the Agisoft Metashape software workflow, which is what you see on the screen now, to generate the models. And then the final step, which we'll show in a moment, was to clean them up in Blender. There's a huge learning curve when it comes to Blender, but because I'm not trying to learn how to make this from scratch, it was doable. I'm not going to interact with this model that's on the right side, but that's the finished project of the sculpture that's being modeled in the TikTok video. You can find all of my 3D models at sketchfab.com/Sinatra. They're all arranged into collections based on where they're from or what type of object it is. But if I interact with it, it is likely that my screen is going to crash, so I will not be doing that today. In order to generate the mural models and 2 of the outdoor sculptures, one of which is what you see here, I used the Polycam LiDAR 3D scanner mobile application on an iPad Pro, which was a completely different process in order to generate the model. Due to the height of the murals, I wasn't able to use the LiDAR scanning feature. You have to get pretty close up on it to use that. So I just used the applications feature that captures a number of photos using the device's camera. And as you walk across the space, make sure you angle up and down to capture everything and get all of the corners and everything. And then the software automatically generates the models on your behalf. After that, I downloaded all of the JPEG photos and the model files and imported them into Blender to do some more cleanup, removing any extraneous pieces, because when it generates the model, it's including like the building behind it and the sky and the grass and everything. So all of that had to be removed. And then I was able to end up with this final product. Again, I'm not going to interact with it because it does crash my computer. Sketchfab.com/Sinatra if you'd like to see any of these models. I use the same method for the final 2 outdoor sculptures, Brick House and 3 Figures, one that you see here. Setup. I originally used the formal photogrammetry setup using Agisoft Metashape, and it just was not coming out well. So I was planning to go back. I happened to be on University of Pennsylvania's campus, which is where the Brick House model is. And I was like, let me see if this mobile application will work for this. And it did. It was really low effort. I was really happy with it. So all I had to do was download the app onto my iPhone XR, reactivate my subscription, follow the same photography and model generation workflow, and clean things up in Blender. So upon reflection, I would recommend that Polycam LiDAR workflow over the other, depending on the project timeline and funding. The latter workflow is much simpler and does the bulk of the work within the mobile application, but it requires a monthly or annual paid subscription. It's about $8 a month. So not too expensive, but if you're going to need it for a long period of time, those charges can rack up. Agisoft Metashape is a lot more difficult to use, and you need a device with a really advanced graphics card, but the hardware and software are available for one flat rate. So, it's kind of like what makes the most sense for the project, and that will determine which of these workflows a user should pick. So the final part of this project was the mapping visualization through ArcGIS StoryMap, and I have a subscription to that available through my institution. But if you are like an independent researcher, it's about $100 per year. And of course, that means you've got to continue to pay that fee as long as you want the site to remain active. Otherwise, it will go down, unfortunately. So as I was working on this, I was able to curate 24 individual altars between the 8 outdoor sculptures and the 16 murals. And on those altars, I made sure to incorporate 5 elements, which are spirit, earth, fire, water, and air. And I was able to just kind of, for the most part, find models that existed and bring those into Blender and curate these altars. And then so I've published the regular versions of them on Sketchfab, and then these altars are incorporated into the AR app. So I developed the AR app in Unity using the Vuforia plugin. It uses an image target, so there's a photo like you see here, and when the device senses the image, it knows which altar to pop up on the screen as a 3D model. The sculptures do a 360 rotation. The mural just kind of pivot because there's nothing really interesting about the backside of a mural. It's just an inverted image. The full story map is available at bit.ly/sacredgs, and this is actually the site here. It's embedded. And I don't know, there we go, the map. These are all of the different public artworks that I captured in this project throughout the city of Philadelphia. And there will be a forthcoming publication available at futures.clear.org that will publish the entire workflow with all of the additional resources. Like there's a YouTube video that walks you through how to put an app in the App Store. It's a very long process, but it will be all available at that publication. This is a digital publication through the Council on Library Information Resources called the Curated Futures Project, A Third Library is Possible. And it's about developing anti-racist and inclusive approaches to digital humanities in libraries and other institutions. This project is a part of a forthcoming addendum to the publication based off of the Present Encounters Digital Humanities Meet Afrofuturism, symposium that I mentioned earlier. All of the presentations that were included in that symposium are going to be a part of this addendum. The app is iOS only. I am an Apple user. I did not create an Android app. However, if you are interested in finding it in the Apple App Store, you can search Sacred GS AR app or scan the QR code that I'm about to take away. So get the, the name of it instead. Because the last thing I'd like to do is share a demo. And I've got like a little rigged up situation here so that my shaky hands don't ruin things. And I'm gonna scroll a bit because I want you to kind of see the story maps first. So I've got like an abstract available here, some information about the project, including how to find the mobile application, giving it access to your camera. It does require 2 devices because you've got to have the story map up on one device and the application on a separate device. And then as you scroll through the photos, here we go, you're able to see the 3D model. And as you scroll, it'll automatically change. And you can kind of get closer to it to zoom in. I don't want to pick it up, so I'll just kind of get about here so you can see the sculpture that's rotating all the way around. That's a photo of the artist. There's a sculpture from the, that one's from the Philadelphia Museum of Art. There's an image of the actual artwork and some crystals down there at the bottom. And this is another one, the Messiah sculpture is in front of the African American Museum in Philadelphia. And the artist, John Roden, is down there in several photos throughout the model. And I am going to stop there.